The United States is about to start a war that it simply cannot win by conventional means, which means it's either an act of desperate self-sabotage, one final opportunity for the military power elite to line their pockets before the whole house of cards collapses, or it's going to go nuclear. Because today, the Iranians announced that they're going to be mobilizing their 33,000, there's that number again, 33,000 strong naval militia, which is comprised of a variety of civilian naval vessels that are going to be retrofitted with, modern military equipment. Now, in previous military war games and exercises that the U.S. has run, this is one of the primary reasons why they can't defeat the Iranians in these war games. It's this blend of asymmetrical and modern conventional military capability, which makes it so compromising. Just imagine the Taliban with ICBMs and modern drones. That's what the Houthis are, okay? And this is what the United States is about to go up against. A United States who military has been floundering for the last 20 years. Troop enrollments are down. The cost of weaponry is far more expensive than it used to be, if you can even manufacture it anymore, due to the global decoupling with the Chinese. There's also other problems, and I know the United States gets most of the components, or there's certain laws that dictate that certain parts have to come from the United States, but it messes up the whole supply chain when there's been this trade war going on between Russia and China. So it's not as easy as it used to be. In the very least, the price is gone way up. We also have the attrition of weapons supply stockpiles due to the recent Iranian war. You have all these countries in Europe who are trying to arm up at the same time. So there's a great demand for military equipment at this point in time. And there's a concerted effort by adversarial countries to wage a information war on military culture in the United States to try to undermine troop enrollments. And we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. But the United States is in a bad way. And if they cannot sustain GDP growth, and if we start to retract and contract as an economy, we can't service the debt, you no longer, and that's another thing, the debt has never been higher upon entry into a conflict. Okay, so you have aging military equipment, you have less weapon stockpiles, it's harder to build the weapons, it costs more to build the weapons, you don't have as many troops, and you have to sustain this debt-based economy by perpetually printing more money. So you need some level of marginal growth in order to keep the whole thing aloft. Now, if the price of oil skyrockets because they blow whatever it is they're about to do in Yemen, because right now you have a situation where it appears as though the Iranians are playing chess and they have the initiative in this fight, in the sense that Hamas had the initiative in Israel. Now Hezbollah today unloaded the largest attacks that they have since the beginning of the war on Israel. And going further down the supply chain, and then this is what you'll notice, is first Hamas attacks Israel, okay? And then Hezbollah does their part. Then the militias throughout the Middle East start to act up. Then the Houthis start to do their part, okay, by blocking the supply lines to Israel, not only affecting their pocketbook, but actually literally affecting their ability to sustain life in that country and resupply their civilian population and soldiers. And so what does the Americans do? They and the Americans and the coalition, well, they're just playing catch up. I mean, it's like a game of cat and mouse. So now what they're going to do is they're going to try to engage the Houthis on this incredibly challenging terrain where, you're fighting an adversary who now has asymmetrical warfare, guys fighting in sandals with smokes hanging out the side of their mouth and grenade launchers. And combined with that, they have a very well-trained, regimented, committed force who are morally motivated, okay? They're relentless in their reasons for wanting to partake in this conflict. They had no real reason, no existential reason that they needed to get involved in this conflict, but they chose to anyways, which says that they're ready to die for the cause, whatever cause they might perceive it to be. Now, the only final link in that supply chain is their primary benefactor, who is the Iranians. Okay, now if the United States were smart, which I think they're smarter than we give them credit for, and I say they by, you know, Canada is the same. Canada just bought $2.5 million worth of drones, or they're going to. So we're in the same boat. When I say the America, I'm synonymous with Canada. Okay, you guys go down, we go down right with you. So when I speak of the United States, I'm speaking of the proverbial United States, including Canada. Okay, so it appears as though the cyber attacks on Iran are ramping up. So just to exert more pressure on the Iranian government, because that ultimately is where they have to make their move if they want to cut off the supply lines to the Houthis. And I think what they're hoping to do is perhaps isolate the Iranians from resupplying both the Houthis and the Syrians, and even the groups in Iraq and Hezbollah, and that's why they've been targeting the airports. The question is, do they have the equipment to sustain that? As the old Douglas McGregor saying goes, and I don't know if it's a saying that he coined or if it's something that he just quotes a lot, a ship is a fool to fight a fort. Eventually, no matter how many ships you have, you're going to run out of weapons at some point. And the problem is that for every $5,000 drone that the Houthis fly over, and I'm sure they have some equipment that costs a lot more than that, but for all of these missiles that they're utilizing, the United States stuff costs a lot more. Now, that's all fine when you haven't run up the debt by like $20 trillion in the last 15 years, okay? There was a time when you could get away with that, when you had the golden global credit card. But when your banks start getting downgraded in their credit rating, then you don't really have as much leeway in order to spend as we maybe used to. So what this means is that this is make or break. And because we're entering this tumultuous election season where emotions are going to be flaring, it's going to be a tempestuous, chaotic season of events. I mean, it's going to be absolutely insane. I don't think it's going to result in a civil war per se, because I think most people, when they have to choose between sitting on the couch and just sucking it up, most people are just going to sit on the couch. Yeah, there's going to be a January 6th type thing. There's going to be that, but we all know that. I'm not even going to comment on that, but it's far from a real deal revolution. Now, I could be wrong. You could very well see states secede from the Union. Who knows? But I do think that in light of this happening at election season, we have to consider the timing of everything that's happening. All of these events seem to be culminating, and if we really are conservative in our timeline of predictions, we would presume that this thing goes hot in the next few months. Hot in the sense of, as soon as you launch missiles into Yemen, at this stage in the game, okay, everything potentially flares up. Because right now, the Houthis are what is arguably preventing Israel and the Americans from escalating, because they're very concerned about their interests in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and any gas or oil producing country in the region. Okay, they're concerned that that shit's going to get out of control. So right when the Houthis get attacked, this is likely going to trigger an escalation on the Lebanese front and on the Hamas front. And I think it would be foolish at this point in time, as much as we know that this collection of different groups, they're not homogenous in their belief systems. They represent different sects of Islam, and they're different groups with conflicting belief systems. But overall, they have the common enemy, which is the Israeli-American Zionist alliance. And I think we would be naive to believe that they would not put that as a priority over all of their differences. And I do believe that because they're talking about it today, Lloyd Austin made mention of the fact that they're going to have to go on the offensive in Yemen. I don't know what that's going to entail, if that's just going to entail this measured horizontal escalation where they start targeting, but they're doing it sparingly, so it's not a full-blown war. so not to provoke the Houthis into targeting critical infrastructure throughout the region, which, as I explained yesterday, will raise the price of oil and crash the U.S. economy. That's the only thing keeping inflation down is oil, period, point blank. The price of oil goes up 150 to 150 bucks. If it doubles, then that means the price of everything doubles, including housing and everything else that, is factored into the CPI. Maybe they'll just rewrite the CPI. Regardless, so this means that as soon as they do that, it's very likely that we're going to see Iran start to become mobilized in some way, shape, or form in the Persian Gulf with this 33,000 strong navy that it's amassing, and this is its militia navy. And part of the reason why, this is part of the reason why, nobody could ever take over the United States, because we would do the exact same thing, right? So the idea that we're going to take the Iranians, the Persians, man, it's just not going to happen. 80 million people, even if that society is divided. The Iranians have mastered the art of suppressing, dissent, because obviously there's a lot of attempts at color revolution in those countries. The CIA has attempted numerous times, in the Mossad, to try to foment unrest. And there's definitely a secular component, and there's a war between the secularists and the theocrats in that country. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but essentially, there are some pro-Western. It's a very westernized country in many aspects. It was, decades ago, and it kind of splintered off into two groups. But primarily, people are proud to be Iranian. They'll fight for their country when the time comes. And you're not going to be able to take that country over. I mean, there's even, just to get a plane in, I think you have to refuel. It's such a massive country that to get, to the parts of the primary targets. Now, you could shoot missiles and stuff like this, but to get planes deep behind enemy lines, I don't even know if you would do that, but you would need a way to refuel, as far as I know. Okay, I'm not, again, these are just things I've heard in passing. So something to keep in mind. But according to local reports, maritime besiege in the Persian Gulf includes 55,000 voluntary forces and 33,000 vessels. And this is going to include local sailors who will be allowed to carry out missions on vessels armed with rockets, according to the IRGC Navy commander, Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri. Of course, I totally butchered his name. They modeled this after the Chinese militia, who have a very similar system. And again, this is something you would expect here. If the shit was hitting the fan, you would expect that our Coast Guard would have, a similar, what would we call it, absorptive capacity, adaptive capacity, whereby they could conscript local boats. I'm sure there's something in a war bill that dictates, like a War Measures Act that dictates they can commandeer civilian vessels in times of war. I'm sure there's something like that. So, I mean, that's really all that is. But it speaks to the fact that this is a futile pursuit to try to do this by conventional means, which means they need some kind of flashbulb event in the form of what's commonly referred to as, I don't want to call it a false flag, because there very well could be a major attack on a U.S. warship that they were just provoked into doing, like they're doing right now with the Houthis. Chances are there's going to be some attacks on the Houthis, and they're going to try to, get the Houthis to fire some missiles their way. And the Houthis are going to do that, and it's going to maybe sink a ship, or it's going to kill some soldiers, and that's it. That's when the thing spirals out of the control. You get the anti-Arab sentiment brewing in the United States. There's a long history of that. Of course, the new generation isn't as hip to that. They weren't indoctrinated with the same Delta Force, Chuck Norris style narratives about the Arab people. So it's very likely it's not going to go as far as we've seen with this whole Palestine thing that I think caught a lot of people off guard. I don't think Israel and the United States anticipated such global pushback. much less in their own countries, in the Western countries. Protests on an unprecedented scale, never before seen. And we cannot forget that. Anyways, the Houthis are already threatening the Americans in Israel with sea mines. And so they're posing in this picture that I'm looking at with a bunch of sea mines. So they're also threatening that, so that they'll just go and send whatever special ops vessels they have and plant a bunch of sea mines. And of course, that's going to make the Bab el-Mandeb Strait unpassable. And they're already seeing the rerouting. I don't know the actual percentage of ships, but looking at marinetraffic.com, it looks like it's a lot of ships, okay, like probably about half. And this is a $10 billion industry for Egypt, and Egypt's not going to be happy about this, okay? So there's going to be pressure on, all of this goes back to Israel, okay? All of this goes back to when is Israel going to relent in its attacks on Hamas. But I don't think that'll ever happen, number one. And I don't even think that if they were to do that at this point in time, what will Hamas have accomplished? If there is no, if they're pushing for a two-state solution, obviously, Hamas is off the table in terms of being a part of that, and whatever remains of Gaza is going to be less than what started. So it makes you wonder if one of the requirements of the Houthis is you need to stop the attacks on Hamas. If that's their only, their only demand, then what was the point of all this if this was a concerted effort, right? The U.S. is concerned about the cost of missiles against Houthi drones. As indicated, they're using SM-2 missiles worth $2.1 million. Now, that's probably the upper estimate. They tend to over-exaggerate with some of these things, but I can imagine, because you got to think that when these weapons were manufactured 10, 20 years ago, possibly even longer than that, they cost a lot less. And right now in the current climate, you're paying way more for stuff, way more. So not only is it more expensive, but good luck getting it, if you can even get it, okay? As indicated yesterday, the USS Carl Vinson is moving west, back from the Philippines. So it quit its Philippine operation prematurely to strategically position itself so it can be 5 to 7 days away from the Middle Eastern theater. There are currently around 50 U.S. warships in this region in total. And I don't even think that includes the Gerald R. Ford strike group that's in the middle Mediterranean, which of course could be brought back into the fight as well. So you're looking at 10, I think it's either, is it 10 out of 11 or 11 out of 12 naval vessels currently at sea. One just left Norfolk yesterday. And so that means essentially half the Navy is currently deployed to this region, and you still have the U.S. trying to pick a fight with the North Koreans at the same time, trying to force a nuclear war on that front. And you still have this saber-rattling in Finland, where they're now going to be commandeering 15 of Finland's military bases, essentially, because once you become a part of NATO, you basically become, let's face it, whoever is the top dog in NATO at the time, you become their bitch. They're the ones that dictate. They have the de facto veto power in the relationship. So that's that. It was the Harry S. Truman USS that left Norfolk yesterday as well. As I talked about yesterday, shipping costs have drastically increased, in some cases 400%. That means inflation. So on top of the inflation that you're going to see from rising oil prices, you're also going to have that freight issue once again. So we are at a point right now. I really need people to understand this, because it's been so incremental up until this point that it's very easy to suspect that the past is going to, or the future is going to proceed in the same inclination as the past, in that the escalation that we're about to see is going to be the same, step by step, gradual, mostly horizontal, managed escalation that we've seen in the past. Things could just flare up really, really quick. As soon as they do this Houthi operation, we could see a lot of tension. Tension is just going to build across the map. And then you're going to have the Israelis, who claim to already have this plan to push the Hezbollah back to the river. That's when that front becomes active. And that's when Hamas becomes way more active. And I'm sure that there's an element of Hamas in the Gaza Strip that is really holding back the brunt of their forces. Remember, this is a 35,000 strong force. We don't even know if, a few thousand of these guys have been taken out and how many fighters have been created as a result of 20,000 civilians. You can bet if 20,000, civilians have died, and I'm guessing it's a lot more than that, because, you're telling me that only every one of those bombs only taken out one person, 30,000 bombs. I don't think so. I think the casualties are in the hundreds of thousands. The starvation there, it's Mad Max, okay? There's people looting supply trucks, as you would expect, and whatever semblance of government remains, they are trying to maintain law and order, and of course they're being accused of being dictatorial and hoarding all the supplies for themselves. But, that's self-defeating. At some point, you have to absolutely, or else, it would just be chaos and the people would overthrow you from the inside out. So you see these videos of these food trucks being raided and a guy with a machine gun, and people say, well, it's Hamas. And, well, sure, that the country is, whether you believe it's legitimate or illegitimate, being run by Hamas. The fact is, you have to have some logistical law and order in order to distribute goods in a war zone like that. Like, it's just not going to work. You have to have a guy with a gun on the truck. It would be exactly the same here, only the guys would have uniforms on. So this idea that, they're being greedy with, and they're hoarding all this stuff for themselves, I think, that's not a long-term strategy, okay? So anyways, you in the very least have created tens of thousands of fighters in waiting, ready to join. And that means that, I don't think we've seen the brunt of the Hamas attack just yet. And of course, this will necessarily entail that the United States get involved in some capacity. Now, what's been happening is that in the same way in Ukraine, Russia came out today and Vladimir Putin said a lot of things. He said a lot about encouraging surrounding countries to cannibalize Ukraine, what remains of it. But above and beyond that, Sergei Shoigu also came out and said that they have evidence that thousands of NATO forces are actually active, under the guise of being mercenaries in Ukraine. Well, tell us something we don't know. We've been talking about that since March of 2022. But now that it's become so out in the open, and now that the Ukrainians are talking about mobilizing another 500,000 men, okay, when they're barely able to, drag people from shopping malls in mid-shop and haul them off kicking and screaming into vans, putting pregnant women close to the front line. I mean, who are they going to be conscripting here? They're going to be obviously bringing in more mercenaries. And so where are these mercenaries going to come from? Because this is a slow bleed on all of the other human resources from NATO countries, militaries that are all at the same time floundering as well. So they are diminished in terms of their capabilities, in terms of their manpower, in terms of their weapons, in terms of just everything across the board, which is no surprise. They're trying to take Transnistria, which has a very large storage of Soviet-era weaponry that the Ukrainians and many of the Baltic states still have the deployment systems to utilize. Maybe it'll stretch them a few more months. Who knows? But it doesn't look good. Okay, it doesn't look good. So what? Yeah, it doesn't look good. It looks as though we might see American troops on the ground fighting Hezbollah. Maybe not in name, but that's what it will be. It'll be them in either IDF uniforms or mercenary uniforms, or we'll just outright, put troops on the ground in order to support that campaign. I'm hearing a lot of people being mobilized right now. Like every day I get somebody, a family member who's got the call. So there's beyond a shadow of a doubt, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of who they can conscript for this fight. And the only thing that they could do next is to do a draft. Now, in order to get to a draft at this point in time, something major would have to happen. There would have to be a major psychological shift. I don't even think a 9/11 incident would cut it, per se. There would have to be you almost need a populist movement at this point to mobilize people, and that's the scary thing, okay? So you need you get a scapegoat first in order to rally people for a cause. Because I don't know if playing on people's patriotism is going to be sufficient. We're almost reaching a point where we're reaching economic contraction, whereby you are going to need the promise of something else. You're going to need a more ideological message. And that's the scariest type, of course, because that's where the imperialist mindset kicks in. And so I do believe that, if Trump does win, and we all know he is not shying away from getting into a war in the Middle East. I mean, he took out Soleimani. He believes that you can wield strength and that's how these people are going to respond. Unfortunately, we just simply, at least based on what I know, and I could be wrong about this, there's going to be a lot of counterpoints to this. People saying, no, the U.S. military is still far superior. It's not going to be outdone by, a few guys in sandals in the Middle East, even though it has historically always ultimately ended that way, in spite of the fact that we may have brought some short-term peace and stability to the region, at least from our perspective. I know there's going to be a lot of people that take issue with that comment, but it is what it is. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that the Saudis and the Yemenis are currently working with one another. They're trying to work on a peace deal. Now, I think that this is the U.S., and if I was the U.S. and I was smart, and I wasn't just thinking about what is right in front of me, which I don't give them that much credit for doing so, I would be encouraging the Saudis to make a deal with the Houthis and to stay out of this and not be part of this coalition. There's this talk that the Saudis not being a part of the 10 country coalition of this force that it's going to fight the Houthis is problematic for the United States. But if I'm Lloyd Austin and I was thinking, I'd say, no, you go, you make friends with the Houthis. That way we don't have to worry about the price of oil going sky high, because maybe they'll be less inclined to target your critical infrastructure, okay, which will, of course, cause the price of oil to spike drastically. So I think that's what's happening there. This is a tentative deal that is currently in the works. And of course, the Saudis are truly on the sidelines now, because they must be thinking this could be the last American hurrah. Because understand that we can't compare this to Afghanistan. When Afghanistan started, and just remember that this is the Houthis, this is the Taliban with ICBMs, this is the Taliban plus modern weapons. So it's a whole other ballgame of hybrid and conventional warfare, a blend of the two. And now they have cyber capabilities. They have a lot of asymmetrical capabilities that in a war of attrition, we would lose 9 times out of 10, just by the virtue of the fact that we would pay so much more for our weapon systems, okay? I lost my train of thought there. But what was I going to say? Something to do with the Saudis and the Houthis. It might come to me in a bit. Anyways, where should we go next? I talked a little bit about North Korea yesterday, and the South Koreans and the United States are running decapitation drills. I believe not much has changed since yesterday, the militarization of the demarcation zone. We have record amounts of weapons tests by North Korea, testing a solid fuel ICBM that can carry an EMP weapon. Nothing new, but they're taunting them as well, okay? And yeah. Talked about the largest missile barrage at the Hezbollah border. Canadian military spending $2.5 billion on drones. Talked about the Ukrainian military. I don't even know why I bring these papers when I just rattle everything off in the first 5 minutes. And yes, according to U.S. officials, to Bloomberg, the U.S. and its allies are considering conducting military strikes against Iranian-backed Houthis militants in Yemen. Everything's coming together, understand? Like the whole Iranian nuclear thing with the IAEA House Resolution 559 that would allow the United States to enter a war with Iran. All of these things are just going to converge right around the right time, and that right time could just be in that Goldilocks zone before the election, and you see, a war flare up. And as we all know, there's never been a president, a lame duck president during a time of war. Now, these are just some odds and ends that I wanted to talk about yesterday, but my time ran out on the clock. And this is just something for you to consider because this is very suspicious. And I've always been suspicious of TikTok and China. And I'm not a big anti-Chinese guy, but as a moderate across the board, I can't help but witness what's happening with respect to the complete and utter lack of parity between the two countries in terms of our information disclosure. So the Chinese have full access to American society. I always call it a glass house. All of our adversaries, authoritarian or not, can see in and see every single thing that we're doing. They can, in most cases, freely get across the border without much resistance, and they can manipulate. They can get into our systems. They can get into our chat forums. There's no such thing as a great firewall nor an iron curtain to keep them out, but we can't get into their systems, so that creates a huge strategic imbalance, especially when it comes to cultural manipulation and ideological subversion. So what is happening right now, allegedly, is that on TikTok, influencers in the military are openly telling others to avoid joining the military. And this is being pumped by the algorithm, understand. And when something gets pumped by the algorithm, people become incentivized to make more of that thing. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people will say, well, yeah, that's why you do the videos that you do. But if you notice, our videos get capped at a certain level that YouTube never allows us to transcend. We could put months worth of work into some of our videos and they still never transcend that zone of 500,000 views, in spite of the fact that we've had countless larger channels come out and compliment us on what we're doing with our more high production videos anyways. So it's incentivizing people, more military people, to speak out about the shoddy conditions, about how, there's horrible food, there's low pay, there's lousy living conditions, broken promises on education opportunities while serving. And I don't disagree with all these things. But why is TikTok, a company that's supposed to be impartial, why are they so quick to promote anything in our society which promotes division and is now trying to undermine military recruitment? And when you look at their own rendition of TikTok in China, it is far more pro-social, it is far more pro-intellect, it is pro-education, it is meant to enhance people's IQs, not diminish them, okay? And unfortunately, we live in such an obsequious society whereby people are so complacent and compliant and just going along to get along that it's very likely we're not going to see any resistance to it from the birth or organically, so it's going to have to come from the top down. And of course, people aren't going to like that because you're taking away our stuff. We just want to watch a bunch of pointless, mindless trash on TikTok, or watch people reacting to others who are reacting to others who are reacting to others who are reacting to people doing dumb shit. It's just crazy. So yeah, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a big, big problem. It's putting us at an extreme disadvantage. And I mentioned this yesterday. One of the reasons why our empire is crumbling is because we've had it so good for so long that we've failed to exercise our strategic analytical capacity. It's atrophied, and we no longer, or at least we do now, we will have to start actually using our brains now. We've relied on technology, not only as individuals, but as a society, as a military. We've become so complacent in our leveraging of this technology that we never had to think, whereas all of our adversaries who are fighting us asymmetrically, they really have to be frugal. They can't just burn a $2 million missile. I mean, they got to find a way to make $5,000 work. So they have to sit there and think. They can take time. They can take generations. They can say, okay, we're going to wait this out for a generation or two, and we're going to, do whatever we have to do to win. It's all about time and pressure, right? And so if you're an underdog, the only way you ever have a hope in hell of winning is if you bide your time and you wait for a weakness, a chink in the armor of your technologically superior enemy, and you seize upon that opportunity when the time comes, utilizing whatever sort of force multiplier asymmetrical means you can muster. And that's exactly what's happened. Another interesting data point about Twitter, and this is completely unrelated to anything I've talked about thus far. X apparently requires biometric data when reporting impersonation accounts. Now, I've noticed this happens on YouTube as well. Like if you place a copyright strike on somebody, you have to provide your name to YouTube and your identity. So it just, not any random person can do this. And in some ways that makes sense from a legal point of view. But this process requires users to consent to X sharing the data with it's spelled AU, AU10 an identity verification firm based in Israel. Interesting. Authentics, okay, like authentic, Authentics. CEO Dan Yerushalmi has directed ties to the World Economic Forum, CIA, and Five Eyes. Okay. The idea that X is going to be our savior in this is just foolish. I always say anything popular is not true. And if you believe that one of the most popular platforms in the world is some sort of bastion of free speech and it's immune from, the corruption that has brought us to this point in time, I think you're very naive. In fact, I've been hoodwinked. I've realized it. I'm going to go into depth about that in a video in the coming days ahead, but you need to be very, very careful because artificial intelligence is going to make a big old mess of things in the coming years to come. But next year, it's already to the point where people are utilizing it to, it's not even so much in the fake news component. It is, I don't know what we would call it. It's like, how you have sludge content, where sludge content is like, you'll put like on the portrait mode videos like TikTok or YouTube Shorts, instead of just, if you're playing a snippet of a podcast or something, you'll have like a guy playing a video game on the bottom just to kind of distract people. It's just like filler content. It's like no nutrients, just filler, just straight carbs, straight simple carbs. And AI is creating so much bloat in the news space that there's a lot of undiscerning people who they could be people who are well versed in internet speak, people who aren't going to open that email that grandma opens, aren't going to click on that link. They know where it's going to take them into the land of bullshit. They don't get easily duped by the run-of-the-mill conspiracy scams on Twitter and, the all caps and generic photo paired with, this accusation of corruption or whatever. People don't even have to fall for that, but you can still fall for what I'm going to talk about. And I consider myself to be, fairly skeptical, and I scrutinize a lot of stuff. I would say like a 95% hit rate in terms of my accuracy, in terms of the veracity of the claims of the content that I post. That other 5% is usually like an image that somebody will post and say, oh, this is an image of the ship that the Houthis just blew up. But it's not an actual image of the ship the Houthis blew up, but the Houthis still did blow up a ship, like that kind of thing. It's not like these big screw-ups, right? But this was very concerning to me. And everybody in the office here was taken aback by it. It was just like, holy shit. So I'm going to break it all down probably in the next couple days. I'm not going to mention any names, but it was very disappointing because this is the day and age we're living in. Finding authentic humans. And the thing, though, that I'm just going to save it for tomorrow, all right? All I'm going to encourage you guys to do, on a more actionable note is top up those gas tanks and just be ready at any moment, because things are kind of coasting along at a manageable level of escalation at this point. The markets are kind of creeping up again, and the rug pull could come at any minute. I'm not saying live in fear. I'm not saying be overly pessimistic. I'm saying go enjoy the holiday season. I got my Christmas shopping done. It's not about shopping, though. It really isn't. If I had my way, I probably would just go on a trip, because it's all about experiences. In fact, I just spent a couple nights at the bunkie with my son, and we played chess by the light of a kerosene lantern, and it's the best 48 hours a guy could ask for. So, it's the little things that count, guys. Stay ready, because eventually it's coming. It's coming.